Let me ask you something uncomfortable. Have you ever disappeared and wished someone would understand why? No explanation, no goodbye, just silence. From the outside, it looks cold, selfish, avoidant. But for many people, disappearing isn't about not caring. It's about caring too much until the system collapses. This is the psychology of people who vanish when overwhelmed, not because they don't feel, but because they feel everything. People talk about ghosting like it's always cruelty, like it's a lack of empathy, a character flaw, a moral failure. But psychology tells a more complicated story. Some people don't disappear to hurt others. They disappear to stop hurting themselves. This pattern usually doesn't begin in adulthood. It begins in environments where emotional expression was unsafe, discouraged, or punished. Homes where being overwhelmed was seen as weakness, where needs were minimized, where asking for space meant causing disappointment, where saying "I can't" wasn't an option. So instead of learning how to regulate stress, these individuals learned how to endure it, quietly, alone, until they couldn't. Psychologists call this a shutdown response. You've probably heard of fight or flight, but there's a third response people rarely talk about: freeze and withdraw. When the nervous system becomes overloaded, when stress, responsibility, emotional labor, and expectation pile too high, the brain looks for the fastest way to reduce stimulation. For some people, that way is distance, not confrontation, not explanation, distance. These are often the same people who are highly empathetic, emotionally perceptive, deep listeners, natural supporters. They absorb moods, they notice shifts, they feel responsible for how others feel around them. And over time, that emotional intake builds pressure. But instead of expressing it, they keep going, because they've learned that being needed feels safer than being honest. Here's the paradox. The people who disappear are often the ones who give the most. They check in, they show up, they remember details, they hold space, but they don't know how to ask for that same space back. So when they finally reach their limit, they don't say, "I'm overwhelmed." They vanish. From the outside, this looks sudden. From the inside, it's been building for months. They didn't leave because they stopped caring. They left because caring became unsustainable. Burnout doesn't always look like exhaustion. Sometimes it looks like silence. Another layer beneath disappearing is conflict avoidance. For many ghosters, conflict feels dangerous, not because of the disagreement itself, but because of what conflict meant earlier in life. It meant rejection, withdrawal, emotional chaos, or being made responsible for someone else's feelings. So instead of explaining their needs, they choose the option that feels safest to their nervous system: removal. No confrontation, no disappointment, no emotional spillover, just quiet. There's also something called emotional object permanence at play. Some people struggle to hold emotional connections in mind when they're overwhelmed. When stress spikes, relationships fade into the background, not because they don't matter, but because the brain is prioritizing survival. So when someone disappears, it's not always intentional avoidance. Sometimes it's cognitive overload. Their inner world is so loud, everything else goes silent. And then there's shame. Many people who disappear feel deep shame for being overwhelmed in the first place. They think, "I shouldn't feel like this. Other people handle more. I'm failing." So instead of asking for understanding, they retreat. They don't want to be seen in their depletion. They don't want to explain what they can't articulate. So they disappear, promising themselves they'll return when they're better. But better takes time, and silence stretches. Here's the part that hurts the most. When people disappear, they often believe they're doing others a favor. They think, I don't have the energy to show up properly. They deserve better than this version of me. I'll come back when I can be present again. But absence doesn't communicate intention, it communicates loss. And that disconnect creates pain on both sides. So what's the way forward? It starts with understanding that disappearing is a signal, not a character flaw. A signal of overload, of unspoken needs, of emotional systems that were never taught how to pause instead of collapse. Healing doesn't mean forcing constant availability. It means learning how to step back without vanishing. Learning to say, I need space. I'm overwhelmed. I care, but I need to disconnect for a bit. Those sentences feel terrifying to someone who learned that needs create problems, but they are the bridge between presence and self-preservation. If you've been ghosted, this doesn't mean you should excuse the hurt. Impact still matters, but understanding the mechanism can soften the story you tell yourself. Their disappearance may not be about your worth, it may be about their capacity. And if you are someone who disappears, hear this clearly. Needing space does not make you unreliable. Burnout does not make you uncaring. Silence does not make you heartless. But disappearing without context keeps you trapped in the same cycle. You don't need to burn yourself out to prove you care, and you don't need to vanish to protect yourself. You're allowed to exist in the middle ground, present but imperfect, caring but limited, connected without self-erasure. Because the people who disappear aren't empty, they're full of feeling, full of responsibility, full of unspoken weight. And learning how to stay, even quietly, even imperfectly, may be the most courageous thing they ever do.